All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. We are continuing in Meretz Hashem this morning in the 9th chapter of Mesillas Yesharim. So again, in the Hachzek Mesillas Yesharim, again Wednesday, the 8th of Cheshvan, the 2nd of November. So the Ramchal writes as follows. He says, Shema Tomar, Harini Matzinu Shechivu Chachamim B'chom Bakum Shishmar Adam Es Atzmo Shmira Me'ula V'lo Yosim Asma B'Sakana Afilu Hu Tzadik Uba Maisim. So remember again in yesterday's shir, we spoke about the idea that one of the things which detracts or prevents one from acquiring the midah of zrizos is that a person is afraid of different things, afraid of the weather, afraid of inclement conditions. And so Ramchal says, but one second, Chazal tell us to be careful with our health, right? And Chazal tell us to be mindful of different things. After all, the Gemara says, Va'amru, hakol b'dei shamayim, chutz mitzinim pachim. And yet again, the Gemara says, according to the Gemara Maseches Ksubis, we just had this not so long ago, that everything is in the hands of heaven, except for tzinim and pachim, right? Fever and chills. The idea being that a person has to safeguard their health. O mikra kasuv, v'nishmartem ma'od l'nafsho seichem, harishein lahachlit habitachon hazeh al kol panim, v'asam amru afilu dvar mitzvah. So the Ramchal says, I don't understand. You're telling me on one hand not to be so overly cautious and not to be so overly careful about the weather, about obstacles, but Chazal themselves tell us that we have to be careful with our health. We have to safeguard our health. We have to take care, and if we don't take care of our health, then ultimately we're held liable. Not only that, but Chazal even tell us, even the performance of a mitzvah, a person still has to be mindful of these things. So how do we reconcile the two? Shabbat say incredible idea, right? Ramchal. This is such a profound statement. Ki yesh yira, v'yesh yira. Ramchal, listen, hear that? Yesh yira, v'yesh yira. No, there's being. Yira literally means afraid. There's being afraid, and there's being afraid. Now, the truth is, really the better way to translate it, really according to Ramchal, is there's being afraid, and there's being vigilant. Those are two things. He says, yesh yira ru'uya, yesh yira shota. There is a proper vigilance, and then there is a foolish vigilance. Yesh bitachon, yesh halalos. There's an ability to have bitachon, faith in Hashem, or I should say, there's a sense of security, and then there's foolishness. Ki hinei Adam Baruch Hu asas Adam bal seichel nachon usvar nechocha l'sheyinag asmo al derech tov v'yishar min hadvarim hamazikim asher nivreu la'anosh es harishayim. Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave us seichel. He gave us seichel, and ultimately, again, we could use that seichel in order to avoid certain things which could cause us problems in life. But a person who chooses to abandon reason, a person who chooses to abandon vigilance, a certain sense of life vigilance, and just not be attentive to anything, that's foolishness. And ultimately, that's called sinful behavior. So in other words, to abandon reason, to abandon vigilance, and just to go ahead and do whatever you want without fear of consequence, that's foolish. She goes on, he says, why is that? Chashkash Baruch Hu wants us to be mindful. Chashkash Baruch Hu wants us to be vigilant. Chashkash Baruch Hu wants us to be careful with our lives, with ourselves. B'nimtza, shemavada sakana hamutba'as b'davar asher hu alu leleha mipnei chasana shmiraso. Hine hu mischayi b'nafsho b'kum aseh b'cheit asher hu chotei. B'nimtza hachet atzmo mevio le'anish. And the very act of just not being vigilant or careful in life, the very act of abandoning reason and subjecting yourself to a variety of life dangers, in and of itself is a culpable offense. Ulam hashmir hazos. Vezos hayira hamiyusedes al hanhagos chachma seichel hiruya she'aleh ne'amar arum ra'a ra'a v'nistar pesayim avru v'nenashu. So Ramchal is explaining, this is what we call yira ru'uya. Yira ru'uya means a proper sense of life vigilance. To go ahead and be careful, to go ahead and be aware, to go ahead and not put ourselves in difficult or dangerous circumstances without thinking about the repercussion of the circumstances in which we allow ourselves to be placed. That's called yira ru'uya. He goes on, yira hashota, but then there's foolish yira. What's foolish fear? Foolish fear? This is a person is excessively careful. Person is excessively fearful. They'll say, by the way, I'll tell you what's very interesting about this. We could actually very much relate to this. Because the truth is, we saw this play out in the pandemic. We saw this play out. There was yira ru'uya. And a yira ru'uya, I don't mean like in the beginning of this where no one knew what was going on. But I mean as things progressed, there was yira ru'uya. And what's yira ru'uya? Yira ru'uya means a person has to be careful. A person has to take precautions. A person has to live a safe life. But what we saw about say is it descended into what Ramchal called yira shota. It descended into craziness, right? It descended into people adopting practices, behaviors, and even creating new lifestyles that were like, just so you see, like, just understand, like in the world of Ruchnius, like, there are people who stopped coming to shul. There are people who stopped davening b'tzipor. There are people who stopped, for what? For what? Again, so I'm not talking about when things were dramatically unknown. But then again, when there was movement back to normalcy, movement back to life, there are people who could not make, or didn't, whatever it was, didn't make that shift back. That's yira shota. Yira shota is when you're so afraid of things that it prevents you from going ahead and living a normal life, and specifically living a ruchni life, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's yira shota. That's foolish fear. That's foolish fear. And that Ramchal says is what we have to avoid. Because that's what undermines a sense of zrizus, and that's what definitely undermines a sense of avodas Hashem. Va'aklal, he says, let's finish off. Va'aklal ha'havchin bein shtei hayiros. So say, how do you know how to distinguish what's yira re'uya, proper fear and vigilance, versus foolish fear and vigilance? He says, Humashechilku chacham zichron lebracha ba'amram, hecha d'shchiach hazek hashayni. Ki makom ha'hazek matzu evenoda yeshli l'shamar. So we'll say it's very simple. Sometimes the only way to gauge normal is to gauge normal. In other words, Chazal have a concept, we'll say, that you're not allowed to do something that has a clear and present danger associated with it. Like, I think, if somebody were to ask a shayla, should they go skydiving? I think the answer to that is no. I think the answer is no. Like, unless, like, you're in the military, or you're running from something, or you have to, to put yourself in a situation of sakana unnecessarily. There's nothing necessary about that. Then at the end, that's avoiding a situation like that. That's called yira ru'uya. Those are the things you should avoid. But ultimately, it's something that's not common, something that's not present. He goes on, he says, Ach makom she'ein hazek onoda ein lira. He'll say, if there's not a clear and present danger, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. V'chol ki yotzei bazeh ne'emar re'usa de lo chazin lo mechaskinon ve'ein lo l'chacham ela ma she'ein avros. So we'll say, how do you gauge these things? Sometimes these things are a little bit difficult to gauge because they're often just based on common sense. And common sense sometimes is not as common as we would like it to be. But I will say, but here the Ramchal is painting for us such a profound picture. So remember, just to go back, tie it together and finish off. So remember, we're introducing this because the Ramchal says one of the things which prevents us from acquiring the midah of zrizus is fear. I'm afraid. So because I'm afraid, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's snowing, it's raining, this, that. So therefore I lose out on opportunities to take, I don't take advantage of life opportunities. But Ramchal says, but Chazal themselves tell me that I have to be vigilant about things. So how do I balance it? To which Ramchal introduces us to yira re'uya, proper vigilance, yira shota, foolish vigilance. Proper vigilance is taking proper steps to go ahead and avoid harm and avoid hurt from common everyday circumstances and situations. Yira shota is a preoccupation with fear, a preoccupation with what could go wrong. That's unhealthy. That's detrimental, and that derails me from dynamic life accomplishment. Right? So we'll stop over here for today. Beautiful. Continue Meretz Hashem and Zvizus tomorrow.